Anita Desai is one of India's foremost writers. Born as Anita Mazumdar in Missouri in 1937, she has excelled as a novelist, short story writer, and author of children's books. She has authored numerous works of fiction, including Clear Light of Day 1980, In Custody 1984, and Fasting Feasting 1999, all shortlisted for Man Booker Prize. Her most recent work is The Artist of Disappearance in 2011. Her novel In Custody was made into a film by Merchant Ivory Productions. Her writing style is often poetic and descriptive. Her childhood days serve as a major theme in her works. She also addresses gender issues and politics in her works. As a feminist writer, she also included the theme of women's freedom in her writings. She is a critically lauded 20th century writer whose novels focus on the inner lives of people and their experiences. She also brings out the lives of middle class women in the society that is partial. Through her novels, she portrays the patriarchal society and depicts the female desire to break free from the society that has held them captive from the societal and traditional bondage in the patriarchal society. One of the distinctive characteristics of her fictions is her lively description of the agony of the female protagonist. She mostly uses the stream of consciousness technique in her work. She frequently uses the flashback technique to recall the past happenings and experiences. The central theme of her novels revolves around mental and spiritual development. All her characters gradually develop through the course of her novels, either for good or for worse. Anita Desai also uses symbolism as a technique in her novels, and the symbols are drawn from human life and nature. Another important aspect of her writing is her artistic use of imagery. Her novels often have splendid images which are functional rather than decorative. Her writings are rich with structure, technique, and language. Introduction to Fasting Feasting. Fasting Feasting is a novel by Indian writer Anita Desai, first published in 1999 in Great Britain by Chatto and Windus. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize for Fiction in 1999. This warm, beautiful novel explores the intricate nets of family life in both India and America. As the title implies, the novel is divided into two parts. At the heart of part 1, set in India, Uma, the eldest of three children, the overprotected daughter who finds herself starved for her life. She is trapped at home, smothered by her overbearing parents, and forced to follow their orders and rules. Uma endures various failed attempts at an arranged marriage, wasting two dowries and causing Mama and Papa to believe she is doomed, and so they decide to let her remain unmarried for the rest of her life. As a result, she becomes their caretaker and servant, forced to complete whatever tasks and errands they require of her. According to Indian custom, women are grown to marry men to get education, which ultimately debilitates Uma's soul and her chances of a satisfying life. When her brother Arun is born, Uma is expected to abandon her education at the convent school to take care of him. She runs away to the convent school and begs Mother Agnes to convince Mama and Papa to let her back into school, but she says she is powerless to help Uma. Uma has a cousin called Anamika. She is bright and beautiful. Though she has the opportunity to go to Oxford University, her parents, Lily Auntie and Bakul Uncle, don't allow her to go and study. Instead, they marry her off to the wealthiest, most educated man they can find. Soon, Uma and her parents hear that Anamika's husband and mother in law beat her and treat her like a servant. On the other hand, Uma's younger, prettier sister Aruna marries quickly to escape the same fate but seems dissatisfied. Whenever she visits her home, she acts superior to her family and especially to Uma. Arun, the only privileged and prized son of Mama and Papa, smothered by Papa's expectations. From a young age, Arun is forced to study around the clock with the best tutors so that he can get into a prestigious university abroad. Uma, who is always inspired by the people whom she encounters, are independent, such as her relative Meera Masi, and her cousin Ramu. Our aunt Meera Masi, the religious widow who travels the country freely, convinces her parents to let her attend spiritual activities and bring Uma with her to an ashram where Uma enjoys her own company happily. After a short period, her parents send Ramu to get her back. Dr. Dutt tries to bring out Uma from her entrapped family by inviting her to come work for her, but Mama and Papa refuse. The family hears that Anamika has been found dead and nobody knows whether it's a suicide or murder. The second part takes place in the United States and focuses on Arun, the youngest child and only boy in the family. After much hard work, he wins a scholarship to study in America. Uma is a woman in her 40s by the time Arun leaves for college in the United States. The following summer, Arun reluctantly stays with an American family, Mr. Patton and Mrs. Patton, and their children Rod and Melanie. The Pattons, who he lives with, appear strange and terrible. Mrs. Patton warmly welcomes Arun, but he soon sees how she struggles against the strong will of her unappreciative husband. Rod, the son, chooses physical perfection and health, exercising endlessly to distance himself from his parents. Unlike women in his Indian family, here the women don't appear to cook at all. Though they stuff their shopping carts, the men barbecue huge chunks of meat, their daughter Melanie binges on innumerable candy bars. Increasingly, Mrs. Patton is desperate to be a vegetarian like Arun, and she also insists him to teach her how to go vegetarian. He soon finds that Melanie suffers from an eating disorder and tries to find a way to tell Mrs. Patton. Toward the end of the summer, Arun and Melanie go with Mrs. Patton to a pond. After some time, while Mrs. Patton is sunbathing, Arun goes to look for Melanie, who has disappeared. He finds herself half conscious in a pile of her own vomit. When Mrs. Patton arrives, she is shocked at what she sees. Melanie enters into a rehabilitative institution and Rod leaves for college. Mr. Patton takes on a second job and Mrs. Patton becomes interested in Eastern spirituality. The novel ends with Arun receiving a package carefully packed by Uma, but he gives the contents away to Mrs. Patton and he leaves, returning to school at the university. Moving from a traditional Indian household to an American one, Fasting Feasting is a powerful exploration of hunger and plenty. Enduring Uma to Arun, the novel shows the inability of the families in either culture to nurture their children, and it is one of Anita Desai's most socially acute novels. Here is a quick introduction to the characters of the book. Uma is the novel's spirited, oppressed heroine, the never married daughter of a middle class family in rural India. Uma's parents neglect her physical and emotional needs, demanding all of her energies and allowing her few freedoms. Yet, she loves people, poetry, and wandering, and is fearless and curious about new people and situations. She has seizures throughout the novel, a characteristic feature that represents her differentness from her family and society. Arun is the quiet, introverted baby brother of Uma and the youngest child of Mama and Papa. Arun fears being drawn into the judgment and expectations of others and seeks personal freedom by withdrawing from social interactions and both Indian and American society. Aruna is the pretty, confident, and socially ambitious younger sister of Uma and second daughter of Mama and Papa. Uma's struggle to free herself from her roots and her family's limitations reflects in her tendency to criticize them and her ultimate decision to live a life apart from them. Mama is the wife of Papa and mother of Uma, Aruna, and Arun. Mama is the picture of a proud, submissive wife, seldom expressing an opinion different than her husband's. She pursues her own interest only on the sly, making it her mission in her life to cater to her husband's needs and to work with him in controlling the destinies of their three children. Papa is a proud, yet insecure middle class legal magistrate, the husband of Mama and the father of Uma, Aruna, and Arun. Papa grew up in great poverty and delights in reminding his children that he worked very hard in school to climb the social ladder and make a better life for himself and his family. Mrs. Patton is the sister of Mrs. O. Henry, wife to Mr. Patton and mother of Rod and Melanie, and the host who invites Arun to stay with her and her family in Massachusetts. She is obsessed with shopping, especially for groceries. As Arun feels lonely, Mrs. Patton tries to befriend him. Mrs. Patton denies her own feelings and tendency, not even following her instinct for most of her life to go vegetarian for fear that her husband will disapprove. She pretends to preserve her image of a perfect family, but she doesn't try to get to know herself nor her children. Mr. Patton is a laconic type. He doesn't speak a lot and uses little words to express his emotions. Mr. Patton is the head of the family. Working full time in an office, Mr. Patton places great value on work and gets frequently frustrated by his family for not being more in line and productive. Showing little interest in his wife and daughter, he only interacts with his son Rod. Melanie, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Patton, suffers from bulimia, a disorder that goes unnoticed by her parents. Melanie is frequently bitter and angry and difficult to talk to. Arun realizes her pain and finds something similar with her own neglected sister. Melanie's eating disorder isn't treated until her mother and Arun catch her nearly unconscious writhing in the forest. Arun sees Melanie would be throwing up in the toilet when they go swimming. He finds her in the woods vomiting. Rod Patton is the son of Pattons. He is athletic and all American, even tempered and unemotional. Rod is usually found working out or watching sports and eating with his dad. Significance of the title. The term fasting refers to starving oneself from all kinds of food and drink, especially as a religious observance. Feasting refers to eating in a large quantity. The book is divided into two parts. The first part takes place in India, focusing on Uma's family, and the second half takes place in America, focusing on Patton family. The connection between the two families is drawn when Arun moves to America. From the title Fasting Feasting, Desai uses food as a metaphor to compare and contrast the two main families presented to us in the book. India, known for its rigid, long-standing customs and tradition, is represented by Uma's family, embodies the aspect of fasting from the title, and America that hyperbolizes living is represented by the Patton family, embodies the aspect of feasting. In one culture, food is used as a vehicle to express communion. In the other, it is used to express isolation. In India, the sharing of meals assumes almost ritualistic importance. The family is drawn together for their meals, even though communication falters and all are there to cater to the father. Food is a frequent topic of discussion: when to cook, what food to offer guests, and who should or should not be invited to share a meal. By contrast, the Patton family has a problematic attitude toward food. The mother stuffs the freezer and refrigerator with food even though what is already there hasn't been eaten. The father grills steaks that no one else wants to eat. The daughter gorges on peanuts and candy only to vomit everything out a few minutes later. The son forages for leftover meat on the implements used for grilling. And the family never sits together for a meal. They eat in isolation. In India, there seems to be plenty of attention to their children. The children are actually deprived of proper parental affection. While Uma and Arun's life seem to be carefully dictated by their father, they want nothing more than to have a bit of freedom for themselves. Economic plenty is very important to Mama and Papa, and they plan to achieve this by finding good marriages for their daughters Uma and Aruna and a good education for their son Arun. Even within the same family, while Arun has more resources and opportunities because of his male identity, Aruna has access to higher status marriage because of her domestic and physical attractiveness and seems to enjoy plenty of parental affection. Uma, on the other hand, is ignored. She is denied primary education and medical care, but Uma seems to possess a different kind of plenty, the plenty that is lost to her parents, her kindness, curiosity, and her desire for freedom and autonomy allow her to engage her mind and her art. These make her richer in many ways than the other characters. In America, where there seems to be economic plenty, they lack the warmth of a family. While they have food stuffed into their refrigerators, Melanie suffers from an eating disorder. Desai uses this contrast between want and plenty to highlight that even in a physically plenty situation, the want might not be particularly fulfilled. This further shows that though the two countries are culturally very different, they might not be so in reality. While Aruna seeks a bit of love and care from her family, so does Melanie. Fasting and feasting, as we know, it is no more the same once we finish the book. What might appear as a grand feast to one might not be the feast expected by the other, and thus they are left too fast and are left starving. And this hunger can only be satisfied when the other person truly understands the feast the starving person expects. Let us now analyze Anita Desai's novel. The novel provides a satirical commentary on rigid gender norms and social pressure that cripple the growth of the individuals of Uma's family into flourishing adults, as Uma, Aruna, and Arun are all victims of intense and grappling aggression that their parents employ on them, indirectly or directly in Uma's case. Uma, throughout the novel, is a tragic figure who lings and yearns for the sense of freedom and to be cut from the toxic and assertive set of parents who are responsible for the damage that their children are prey to. Uma at the end is a shell of her former self, even considering herself to be ash like the remnants of her cousin Anamika, who is another victim of rigid and unkind social norms, who literally loses her life despite being the ideal version of woman the society demands, and is intelligent, kind, and docile, but ends up tragically losing her life. Desai's title is a paradox in itself that portrays the contrast in the living conditions and the mental perspectives of its character. Fasting is a rigorous religious practice that stands as a symbol of India's actuality, a country that is squabbling to move on every day, abiding by its extremely harsh and severe societal norms and toxic obsession over perfection, that most of its inhabitants are merely existing and are not truly alive. Feasting, on the other hand, is a surplus, the abundance of everything that exists in the consumerist society of America, that you're choking from the excessive instead of a satisfying living. This is achieved by setting the novel in the said two countries with the different perspectives of Uma and Arun, who are infinitely different from one another and yet are grappling to escape the effects of harsh and assertive parenting, neither truly being happy despite being on the opposite spectrum of living conditions and everyday encounters. The story starts in Uma's perspective, jumping back and forth through present and past, revealing with each past recollection the reason behind the current unhappy existence of the family that had roots far beyond Uma's birth, as she gives a slice of her parents' past that would lead to an endless cycle of reasons that all traces back to the patriarchy and misogyny that is rooted in the society's culture. While Uma finds solitude appealing, is often neglected that she is truly lonely, unbounded from the rest of the world that she so intensely yearns for. The fact that she attempts several times to submerge and drift away to death by jumping into the river that stands as a symbol of escape shows the lengths Uma would go to cut herself off from the influence of her family, choosing death often than her soulless life. Arun, who the parents think they had pampered and brought up well, suffers the same consequences of Uma, not being able to involve with other people and unable to distance himself from imposing family culture, even though he now lives in the other side of the world far from his home. He is asocial, emotionally stunted, and is reeling from the absence of true nurture, yet he, unlike his parents, retains some of his humanity and helps Mrs. Patton and her daughter Melanie, who's stuck in another dimension of patriarchy and consumerism that haunts the American society. Though the individualistic nature of American life is appealing, there is no sense of warmth or a community living that Arun was denied even in the communal living in India. The families are ignorant and dysfunctional in America as well. Desai skillfully portrays the long term effects of toxic and rigid upbringing that cannot be escaped even by physically distancing oneself, and begs for a change in the ways that families operate, as the intricacies of familial relationships form an important piece in the puzzle of life. Moving on to the themes. In contemporary literary studies, a theme is a central topic, subject, or message within a narrative. The characters in Desai's novels are crushed by social pressure and cannot be free. This pressure creates isolated people who are dislocated from their environment and from what would have been their own reality, and that is to say, their vision of life and of the world. Society alienates them, and this deep feeling of isolation appears in different ways in the novels. The characters are not able to express themselves. This problem of communication can create alienation or be a consequence of it. But isolation also appears in the way of Desai treats space linked to cultural dislocation and time. Materialism and communication. In fasting feasting, the absence of communication is obvious, but it is presented differently. The daughter Aruna embodies consumption after her marriage with a very wealthy man. It becomes her only way of expression. She only speaks about what she has and what the others do not have. Consumption and materialism are her only references, her only words. She cannot communicate beyond this concept of frenetic possession. The American characters, the Patton family, are also described for their materialism, especially with their relation to food, consumption, regurgitation, and digestion. Like Aruna, consumption is their only way of expression. They consume, digest, and regurgitate feelings but are unable to put words on them. For example, Melanie consumes, digests, and regurgitates her candies because she is unable to express herself differently. We witness a materialistic feast, whereas the American family has deficiencies in emotions like love and affection. Uma keeps everything inside, whereas she feels a greater diversity of emotions than Arun or Aruna. Uma is a foreigner to pleasure, which shows the bitter unhappiness that accompanies her in the external world. She chooses to be silent because her personal dimension and social dimension of self esteem represses her confidence, and gradually negative evaluation and social rejection sets in, making her highly sensitive to her subjective discomfort. Anamika, her cousin, is the most terrible example of this lack of love and absence of communication. She does not speak at all in the novel, so she is not considered as an individual. All the clues of her horrible situation were not discussed or taken into account. The absence of communication leads to her death. Cultural dislocation. We are confronted with the values of two different countries. India is described as a place of shortage, whereas the United States as a place of abundance. Both societies beget frustration. In India, it is due to the patriarchal society based on gender discrimination, and in the United States, it is provoked by the rapidity of the way of life and the absence of commitment between people. The American family is not connected because there is no feeling of belonging between people, but due to two different environments, both with flaws, create alienation within the family bubble. The different behaviors of the characters highlight the contrast that exists between the cultures and the two countries. Walter Kishore quotes that just as Arun is a compulsive vegetarian, so are the Americans compulsive non vegetarians and equally compulsive shoppers. Arun experiences cultural dislocation in the USA. He was traumatized by his Indian life and at first finds relief in a foreign country. His identity is disconnected from his origins. A new space is a first step towards a new freedom. But the immersion in another family alienates him again. When he announces that he is a vegetarian, Mrs. Patton wants to follow his diet and invites him to shop with her to cook what he likes. The discrepancy between the two cultures is highlighted by food, and it is also conveyed by the very contrasting feelings of the two characters. Mrs. Patton feels pride and complicity, whereas Arun has a sense of mistreatment, the cultural gap disconnects them. Death. In Desai's novels, death is a recurrent theme, but it has two sides. Indeed, it can be perceived as an act of sabotage or as an act of salvation. Death is not always physical, it can be used as an allegory, and actually, we can see several social deaths in the novels. We are going to analyze death when it is brought as a final solution chosen by the characters. If we look at fasting feasting, Meera Masi, Uma's widow aunt, is experiencing a social death. She has been rejected by her family since she has become a religious ascetic. But she is completely satisfied with this choice. Social death is her solution to fight social oppression, but in her case, it is also linked to her status. Widows are outcast in Indian society. The following are the symbols used in fasting and feasting. Water as a symbol of momentary change in life. Water appears throughout the novel as a symbol of both mystery and freedom. Mama, Papa, Uma, and Arun live near the holy river in the province, and many relatives visit to make a pilgrimage. Although Uma can't swim, she leaps headfirst into the river, having to be pulled out before she drowns. For Uma, the river symbolizes her desire to submerge herself in the mysteries and ecstasy of spirituality, but it also represents a momentary escape from her life with Mama and Papa. Meat as a symbol of change and advancement in life. To the family of Mama and Papa, eating meat symbolized advancement in life. This is because they wanted to deviate from the Indian and Hindu culture of being vegetarian. Eating meat was therefore a way of breaking away from the cultural and religious practice. Mother Agnes as a symbol of hope. Mother Agnes was a symbol of hope to Uma when Uma was a student at her school. When Uma was ordered by her parents to drop out of school, she ran to Mother Agnes for help. Uma trusted that Mother Agnes would help her and convince her parents to allow her to stay in school. The shawl. Mama, Papa, and Uma send a care package to Arun in America, which arrives right before he departs the Patton's home. Arun can tell that Mama and Papa have selected the contents of the package with great care, but he has no room for the shawl in his suitcase. In this light, the shawl comes to symbolize a part of his identity that he has shed, the part that is governed by Mama, Papa, and Indian traditions and customs. The shawl does not make him homesick because he enjoys his freedom in America too much. The fact that he gives the shawl to Mrs. Patton also symbolizes that she is seeking a different way to live spiritually in the aftermath of Melanie's illness and institutionalization. The shawl represents Mrs. Patton's movement toward the acceptance of another culture's beliefs and traditions. The painting of Jesus as a symbol of solace. When Uma was at Mother Agnes's office asking for her help, she, that is Mother Agnes, offered her a painting of baby Jesus and Mary. The painting was to offer Uma comfort as she was distressed because her parents wanted her to drop out of school. To conclude, Desai showed us, along with various characters in the novel, that women or men, every person feels deprivation and abundance in their life. In two different cultures, characters suffer because of different subjects. Uma is a victim of perspective to women of Indian society. Feeling of compulsion finds Arun in America too. Family structure in Indian and American cultures has various flaws. Unity of parents in Uma's family does not consist of equality between wife and husband. It consists of men's dominance of society. On the other hand, in the American side of the novel, there is a great gap between wife and husband, and ignorance captured members of the society. Uma and Arun symbolize the reflection of families' enforcements. They both weren't able to live the life they wanted. Having a hidebound mama and self-centered papa made them unhappy. Many characters in the novel become victims of judgments and perspectives. Total freedom of anonymity is some utopian idea which is impossible to happen due to the major idea of society for characters in the novel. We clearly can see characters like Arun or Uma who live with the burden of family traditions and with the ordinance of family ends up unhappy. On the other hand, characters like Mari Masi or Ramu who live without boundaries despite being marked as black sheep live comfortably and have the freedom of choice. Uma, as a protagonist, is portrayed as an Indian woman whose characteristics are influenced by their family, who are still holding on to an opinion about girl education from the medieval era. The family still keeps the tradition although they live in the modern era now. She lives in a family who still have traditional values. Girls are to be married and boys are to become as educated as possible. And also, she is portrayed as unattractive, unintelligent, and clumsy, which makes her unlikely to get married. Although she is persistent to get educated and has a job, she is limited by her parents' values, so she cannot do much in her life. In the end, she becomes submissive, reticent, and stressful. There is unfairness for a woman in India who lives with a family who still holds traditional values and whose family's point of view strongly influences the woman's characteristics. It can be seen through the change of their characteristics in facing the problems in their life. The girls of medieval India, especially Hindu society, were not given formal education. Not only about education, the families also share the same view about marriage. A woman is perfect if she is married because marriage is very important according to their belief. Marriage is said to be made in heaven and sanctity associated with its unparalleled. No doubt, even in modern age, this is one tradition that has not lost its own glory and importance. This concept does not exist only in India and for Indian women because we can see this case also in other countries in Asia who practice patriarchal systems. We can also see it in China, some parts of Indonesia, and in some other countries in which the liberation of for women is still limited, they cannot do what they want. For example, they still have an opinion and a woman does not need to obtain higher education because in the end she will get married and hold all the household work. The author's purpose in the novel is to encourage all women, especially who are unconfident and who are stuck in the unfortunate condition to do something in their life. The author wants them to stop thinking that their perfect life is dependent on their appearance and other characteristics because humans are created differently and each of them has her unique characteristics and different potential. The only thing that they have to be concerned about is how they can get the liberation to develop their potential. The author also probably want to criticize the parents or the older generation to give the liberation to their children or younger generation so that they can find the meaning of their life.